Good evening, film fans, and welcome to the last night of our festival this year. We have lots to talk about. I'm Ellen Rand. I co-founded this festival a long time ago now with Judy Disler. But enough about me. I'm thrilled to introduce Jerry Risius and Beth Leveson, the co-directors of this wonderful film. And let me tell you just a couple of things about them before we get started. So, Jerry. Stormlake is Jerry Risius' directorial debut. Iowa born and raised. He has been a director of photography for more than 25 years, and he's worked on projects like the Anthony Bourdain series Parts Unknown and No Reservations, The Kingmaker on Showtime, Generation Wealth on Amazon Prime, and Seeing All Red on Netflix. He's also on the faculty of the School of Visual Arts MFA program in social documentary film. Beth Leveson, director and producer, co-director and producer, based in New York. Beth's recent producing credits include Women in Blue, Independent Lens, Emmy-nominated Made in Boise, Independent Lens, Emmy-nominated Personal Statement, and 32 Pills on HBO. Stormlake, which she also produced, marks her return to directing. She is co-founder of the Documentary Producers Alliance and is on the faculty of the School of Visual Arts MFA program too, in social documentary film. She's also a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. I do want to thank our sponsors for this film, PBS New Jersey, and Wendy Weinberg DeSanti of Weichert Realtors, and also TNEC Tomorrow, one of our online local news sources, because TNEC, even though we are a town of 40,000, we are a news desert too. So let's get started. I know we have lots and lots to talk about. Jerry, you grew up in Iowa, not terribly far away from Stormlake. How did that inform your desire to do this film and how you approached the film, and also your background in learning about anthropology early on?
All right, I'll try to break that down, but first of all, thanks everyone for tuning in, and thank you for watching the show and sticking around afterwards. So, I did grow up in a very small farm, kind of the last of the subsistence farmers. My father raised a family of 4 on 160 acres in Iowa. It was also a hog farm, and I left in the mid '80s to go to college. Ended up moving out to the East Coast. But always continued to stay in touch with my Iowa roots. I really believe that Iowa is still my home. I go home and visit my family all the time. And so when the Pulitzers were announced in the spring of 2017, the title of the Pulitzer announcement was "Small North Iowa Newspaper Wins Pulitzer Prize." And I had like a kind of an exorcist moment when Linda Blair's head kind of twists around, because no North Iowa town has ever won a Pulitzer. So it's usually you read the New York Times, the Washington Post, all these different larger newspapers. So I immediately went online. I checked out the Stormlake Times. I checked out Art Cullen. And within a couple of days, I was calling him, and we shared a lot of mutual stories about, Iowa. So I loved what he was doing. I thought because I was from Iowa, I might be able to have a good, strong voice in helping tell his story to a national audience. And so I did. I went out and shot a character reel later that summer, came back to New York, and then cut a character reel together, and then spent a bit of time trying to convince people, mostly Beth, to join because we also teach together. So I asked her if she would be interested, and so eventually, I think eventually she did, like the next summer.
Great. Beth, tell us about your involvement with this film. It seems to me that the two of you have a similar approach to documentary filmmaking, in that you don't insert yourselves. You let the story kind of speak for itself. And so tell me how you approached your responsibilities on this film, and how did you divide up who did what?
Well, I ended up joining forces with Jerry in the late summer of 2018, and knew that we really just had to sort of develop the story further, develop a proposal, kind of start figuring out what's really the story that we're going to tell. And then, and we were, and then really what happened was about March of 2019, we learned that Art would be moderating the first multi-candidate event of the 2020 presidential election cycle. And we just thought, okay, that could be the beginning of the movie. We got really lucky. We raised some money so that we could go out for our first shoot. And I think, we really, in the field, Jerry was shooting and certainly thinking about story, but it's also really hard to think about like story when you're shooting because you're focusing on shooting. So we just sort of were a team, and I was looking and watching where maybe he wasn't sometimes, or, just maybe one step ahead so that Jerry could kind of really think about what we were doing in that moment. And then, in post, I really love post. I really work well with editors. And so I was working really closely with our editor to really kind of craft story, and Jerry was doing that too. So, I think what was incredible was, I think that Jerry, something that is irreplaceable was, it's Jerry's general nature. He's like the nicest person ever, but also being Iowan, that, I think that it was much easier to forge kind of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think there was also trust because, we had designs and plans and knew that we had to shape a narrative out of this. It wasn't just being fly on the wall, but I think there was a mutual respect between us and the Cullens. I think the Cullens got a sense pretty early on, like we weren't getting in their way. We were letting them do their work. If we were going to interrupt them, we would sort of make sure that it was okay. So they felt like they could do their thing. And then as a result, I think they let us do, our thing. And so, a lot of people are like, it's like you weren't there. It's like, no, they knew we were there. But, I think that there was just real mutual trust for each other's process.
Right. Obviously, this is a very intensely local story about a small town, and yet it really kind of goes broader and touches on a lot of different issues that are of national concern: climate change, immigration, big agriculture, politics, and et cetera. When you first approached the Cullen family to do this, did you sort of envision that it would sort of ripple out into all these other areas?
We can probably tag team this a little bit, Beth, but I certainly know that, when we started, we knew that we would have the structure for a political, like a bookending maybe between the beginning and the end, because we didn't want to make a political film, but yet we still wanted, because Iowa plays such an outsized role in our nation's politics, everybody came to Iowa, right? To try to, get voters, and to try to, the way that you get voters is by going out and talking to, a local newspaper hero, for example. So many people came through to see Art, and we actually didn't use many. We have Mayor Pete, and we had several other scenes that we ended up not using because we couldn't, just dedicate so much time to the politics. But I think that, in those large, sort of lanes and issues, I guess, that are affecting the entire country, we found that it was actually, on a very small scale, we went out to visit Big John, and John was having issues trying to plant. So even though, it's an issue of like, trying to talk about yields and what comes of that, it actually then leads to a bigger story of what is happening in Iowa. It's actually getting wetter and wetter by the decades. So, those sort of stories we saw building in a very micro level to a very macro sense, and that, they had universal sort of touchstones for people all over the country.
Yeah, I think that was a real exciting moment for us, was when, we started shooting. At first, we thought it was going to be a film about Art. And then it wasn't long before we realized, oh, this is really an ensemble film. It's about a family, and because the whole family makes the newspaper happen. And then we started to realize it's about a community. And then once we really realized it was about a community, we actually started to see how we knew we were onto something when in this small town that is quite remote and hard to get to, that it really was a microcosm of so many themes playing out on the national level. And in that way, it allowed us to really humanize so many of these themes, you know, struggles around immigration, struggles around climate change, struggles around consolidation of business, you know. And then what was so interesting is in that when we were shooting, we were like, okay, now we've got a climate change story. Now we've got like an immigration story. Now we've got a big ag story. But as we were editing, it was sort of this process of realizing how all those issues are so interrelated, and so that they're not separate, you know, and that's really how the world works. These things are, no pun intended, these things aren't all in silos, you know.
Yeah.
They really are kind of woven and deeply connected. And so like when Art says, you know, when he's at his computer and he's like, I don't know what would happen if you blew it all up. I don't know what happened, you know, to all these immigrants who come here to work here. You know, he recognizes that the big ag is problematic, but it's also the source of business for all these people who come to Stormlake from all over the world. So it was a process.
One of the things that struck me in the film was that the Collins approach to news and putting out the newspaper is not dissimilar to your approach to doing the documentary film, in that, you know, you believe in going to the humanity of people and doing one-on-one and relating to people and like that. And I'm wondering if you see similarities in your profession as filmmakers, and see similarities in the struggles that you have or the hurdles that you have to get over, as the local newspapers do.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they're telling stories about people. We're telling stories about people. They're trying to do it as authentically as possible. I think we're doing the same. You know, they're kind of living hand to mouth, and you know, we're always building the tracks while the train is moving. I mean, right before this Q&A, I told Jerry to write this fundraising letter because we're doing all this impact work, and you know, we're believing that we're going to keep going, but we're raising money as we go. So, you know, we're an independent enterprise too. And I guess the last thing is that, you know, they're really seeing, how do we survive with this consolidation of the industry and what that means for content? And that's definitely happening with, you know, documentary film too. You know, everybody's chasing eyeballs. It's become very commercially driven, revenue driven. You know, we're really thrilled that the film could be on public television because we really felt like that is the spirit of the film, that it's not a profit driven platform. And, you know, we felt like it would be an odd mix for this film to be on a platform that is kind of explicitly chasing eyeballs.
And Jerry, is there anything that you want to add to that?
No, I mean, you know, I would say, you know, comparing us kind of to journalists or to the Cullens, I would, you know, I'd love to be compared to the Cullens because I found them to be, you know, amazing people. And I think that, you know, there are similar pursuits. You know, ours is a much longer format. The process takes, you know, so much time to go through, and there's, you know, they're doing stories, you know, in 15 minutes or half an hour, or maybe 2 days, or maybe more investigative that take, you know, up to a year, you know, when they were doing their the research on the water, where Art won his Pulitzer Prize, the water suit that they were being sued, their county is being sued for. Sorry. Anyway, but yeah, no, I think that we do have a lot of crossover in terms of what we do. We're, you know, we're selling stories, we're telling stories, and you know, but we're, again, as Beth says, we're trying to be as transparent, as authentic, and really to allow the people whose story we're telling to be told, right? We're kind of conduits, and it's really their story.
You've also said in the past, Jerry, that that you like to be in touch with people that you've worked with, that you've, you know, done documentary work on, and I know that you've been in touch with the Cullens since the film. Tell us about that. Tell us about what they're up to.
Oh, it's been amazing. I mean, they've become, there's the Iowa Nice, I guess, which I don't know really what that is because I'm from Iowa, but you realize, they it's almost familial, like the way that we were being treated. It was so nice, being invited over. But since we finished the filming and we've started to go into different festivals, we've actually toured with art, and we did a whole tour through Iowa, just in small towns across the state. And many of the family members came out, and the reception has been, magnificent, really. Like they are really telling the story of so many places around the country. So I think that this story is resonating with the country, with them as the main characters, is kind of overwhelming for them. Like they can't believe that they're now, being talked about in places, all over the country, essentially. But yeah.
I know that the both of you have a really crazy busy schedule coming up in promoting this film, and we're all rooting for you because it's a terrific film, obviously. But tell us about what you're also involved with. What's next on your agenda?
Well, one thing, that I'll say that we're doing with this film is we are really committed to helping to secure the future of local news as best as we can. And so, what's been so interesting is lots of times when you make a film, you do a festival run and maybe a theatrical run, and then you kind of go to broadcast, or if you're going to a streamer or what have you, and that you maybe have an impact phase. But we've found that the response to the film has been so strong, and we have so many incredible national partners. We're working with Report for America and Solutions Journalism. And most recently, we just, as of last week, kind of concretized a partnership with the Lenfest Institute, which is based out of Philadelphia. But we're really working to, we actually thought we would be done by now. And we're trying to extend our campaign by another 6 months. And we're focusing on helping communities build local philanthropy for their local newspapers. And we are creating a media literacy toolkit to increase media literacy for high schoolers and college students. And we're even working on a journalism curriculum. And then we're trying to do community screenings like these, because our hope is that we can get local news sources, we can almost step away, and that the local news source in the community can foster their own dialogue. How did they sustain local news in their community? How do they create local news in community if it's now gone? So in terms of this film, we're trying to keep going because there's just been demand, and the crisis facing local news is only deepening. It's not getting better. So we feel like we have a tool that organizations, national organizations, local organizations can use. And so we really want to make it available to them. So on this film, there's more to come.
Great. There's some questions coming up from the audience, and in line with that, one is, if a contribution is made to the foundation, will it go to the Stormlake Times? Does anybody know about that?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it will. It's actually it's a foundation that 4 different family-owned newspapers started actually pre-COVID. They realized the writing was kind of on the wall, or at least I don't think they actually legally became an entity until sort of in the middle of the pandemic. But they had been already starting. So they use it. They use the money, and then they divide it up in between the 4 different family-owned newspapers. Mm-hmm.
But I will say that you could, if you want, I do know you can tag your contribution. So you can request that your contribution go to the Stormlake Times. But if you're, the nice thing is that if you support Western Iowa journalism, you're also supporting Lorena Lopez's work, and you're supporting other local newspapers in the area. So, and are you able to take anything from our Zoom chat into OV, like into the OV chat? Do you guys know if you can do that? Because I'll just say that we have this really cool partnership with a t-shirt company in Iowa called Ray Gun. And if viewers out there, if you Google Ray Gun and Western Iowa Journalism Foundation, there's this amazing t-shirt line, and you can get a t-shirt, and 20% of the proceeds go toward the Western Iowa Journalism Foundation. And there's like a great t-shirt that says Art of the Free Press, and it has a picture of art on it. And there's one that the truth must win. And there's another one that says, this t-shirt cost more than the monthly subscription to my local newspaper. So anyway, so that's a really cool thing. You can wear your support of local news.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Here's another question. How did the unexpected coronavirus impact your filming?
Good one. Well, it was, I mean, nobody knew the pandemic was coming, so it just turned our country, our world, and every place upside down. And we had to really think about how, which was, in their financially the lowest state, into probably one of their most needed times, in their community. I'm a bread and butter cinematographer, so I have equipment in my basement. So Beth and I then would conduct interviews over Zoom with all the Cullens beginning in the middle of March, and we did those every week or every other week, depending upon what was happening, all the way into mid-June, until they kind of peaked, right? They peaked in the early part of June when their numbers were at 1,000, I think, and then they really came down after that, after their big peak. So we told the story, or we let them tell their story through those Zoom interviews, and then we got all their newspapers, and then we shot macro shots of the headlines and sub headlines, and we let then their reporting also tell part of the story, and then a few shots of the empty town and empty parks and different places that we asked Dolores to get. So it was a real in a weird way, it allowed us then to allow their newspaper to tell the story almost through the actual physical newspaper itself.
Yeah, but we thought it was going to be a real crisis. We had a moment where we thought, well, first of all, we thought what was going to happen to the Cullens, right? And, we were really worried about them. And then we thought it was going to be a crisis for the film, but it really became a creative opportunity. If you want to show the role and the value of a local newspaper in a community, like this was the moment. And we were so lucky to be making a film about a newspaper that we could lean into it to help tell its own story. So it took us a while to figure that out. It might have seemed obvious, but figuring that it was just sort of this process. And we realized, like, if you were to watch the film at that moment where it's COVID, we really go tighter and tighter into the newspaper. As our motion graphics team said, let's get up in the grill of the newspaper. And we really do.
Right. You can actually, you can see the flex of the newspaper when we're shooting. We really wanted to make it physical, like it was, okay, you were there and reading it, Yeah.
Were there any particular surprises besides COVID that struck you as you were filming? I don't imagine you thought that the pig episode would kind of present itself.
I think for me, the biggest thing that was so wild was like how busy and industrious that a local newsroom could be. I think I had this idea, local news, it's sleepy, there's not much going on, but there was always so much going on. And, we really had to decide what we were going to focus on. And it was just, if a newsroom is this busy in a town of 10,000, or maybe 15,000, a town of 40,000 like Teaneck, there's a lot of news to convey. So if you don't have that paper, I was like, wow, all this would go untold, That's a big surprise for me.
One of the things I think that we did know before, but I think it was very hard forcefully reinforced, whatever, was that when you lean into local stories that are not political, you really are building the community, right? So like kids that are on the volleyball team or on the football team or in band or are from the FFA or the Ducks Unlimited team, that are actually skeet shooters. When they get the newspaper and their picture is on the front page of the newspaper, there's a sense of pride, right? Of like, hey, I did something. I made the local, front newspaper. And it's like, and I think it's really, that's what Art talks about when he talks about building community. The community is as strong as, you celebrate your wins and your gains. And so that I think wasn't a surprise, I think, for us, but it just was really reinforced. I think then we could see the people react to different stories that they were a part of. And they really, felt like, this newspaper has got our back. They're really watching the net with.
I think the one other thing that was really illuminating is that we have this idea that local news is, okay, Teanex's local news, or I grew up in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, like Pittsfield's local news, but realizing like the value of a Spanish language newspaper to a community like this, or the value of historically Black owned newspapers and communities, or, Chinese language newspapers in communities. So just to think about to really realize that it's not this like monolithic thing, local news, that it's community news, and that within a community, there can be other communities. And I think it really bolstered our appreciation of those. And, if we think local news is struggling, these other community newspapers are really struggling even more.
Another question is, was the local press, like the Stormlake Times, able to communicate to their readers the seriousness of the pandemic? Another pandemic-related question.
Yeah.
Were the Stormlake Times able to communicate? I think they were. They if you look at we included a lot of the headlines, I think, through that, and they were able to communicate that, and people were reading that. They didn't know, they knew, although, I think that, this was something that Governor Reynolds had done, basically giving the testing authority to the meatpacking plants all over the state. And that was, remember in end of May and June of 2020, all these meatpacking plants were closing down all over the country. And those were being reported mostly by local news. The Waterloo, plant, they got closed down, but their local paper, the Tyson plant in Stormlake, was all being covered by the Stormlake Times. So you go to each one of these communities, and so you have many people who live in the community who don't work at the local meatpacking plant, but many who do. But you're all going to be a part of the same community, and everyone wants to know what's happening, what the numbers are, what's happening, who's being tested, how many people are being tested, So I think they did an amazing job at conveying what everyone's concerns were.
Here's what, and I think you've sort of touched on this a little bit in talking about community, but here's a question. I'm surprised that there was little to no local politics, mayor, town council, theatrics, board of education reflected in the film. Any thoughts on why not?
Well, there were local politics reflected in the film. I mean, we followed Tom Lane,
Right.
who ran for city council. And we also covered a school board meeting where at the very end, where Tom says, hey, was there a complaint about the guy who showed up positive? And they said no. And we also included
It was school board, right?
Yeah,
school board, yeah.
And then we also included, it had come out of a school board meeting, but the dual language program. We did go into the schools. So we chose, we followed them as best we could, and we chose what we felt would be the stories that were most dynamic and visual, and that brought the place to life. Did cover school sports and the parade. So I'm sorry if that viewer out there was wanting to see stories we
More
didn't
local.
cover. We made the best choices we kind of could, or we felt like we were making the best choices that we could. So
certainly the range, we wanted to use a range from the national politics, through the, down to local politics.
Yeah.
And here's another political question. The caucuses seem so antiquated. Do you think they need to be modified?
Oh my goodness.
I mean, the people, I think what Arts has a great line, I think, at the end of that. It says that this is a place where neighbors can actually come together and actually have a discussion that may not agree with each other. And I think that's happening in our polarized country. It's happening less and less, even if you're within the same party, because it is a party builder, right? So if you're there and you think Biden should win, or you should think Bernie should win, or you should think Amy should win, all those people then come together. They sit down at tables and they talk about their platforms and which one they want, and why. And I think for that, we don't see that in American politics very often. And when you go to a primary, you go behind a sheet and you just vote all by yourself and you don't interact with anybody. So, I like this. It is antiquated, but I think it's also, a very community building, as long as people aren't carrying, open or concealed weapons. I guess if they get into a fight,
Yeah.
it might be a problem.
And it's funny, I mean, I'm going to totally show my politics or my leanings or whatever, but it's like, for me, if the metaverse is not antiquated, I'm not sure it's better, and it was really remarkable to see people disagreeing. I mean, we could have made a film about the caucus. I mean, just to see people disagreeing, but disagreeing through like meaningful, neighborly, communal conversation. I mean, that's just been absolutely lost because we're not antiquated anymore. We're in like our modern, devices, in our social media feeds. So, antiquated. I wonder if sometimes the technology has led us to where we are. We've forgotten how to coexist. So I like what Art said. He was like, he uses an expletive, but he was like, it was always fucked up, but can't do that anymore with cable news. I don't know. I love that.
I did get called out by somebody who came to the Denver Film Festival and was very upset that we included expletives in the film.
No.
It might have been bleeped in the version you have. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, if this was a PBS, it probably was.
It bleeps on public television.
Yeah.
We just didn't want to bleep.
I think you actually covered this very briefly in the film, but the question is, what was the outcome of the town council election? I mean, he won, right?
Yeah, we actually went to the we went to the viewing that night and watched the returns come in. He ended up winning, but then because we had so many other stories, really because of the format that we get with PBS, you strictly have to stay to 85 minutes. So we couldn't show that. We decided then to show it just with the newspaper being printed. So we rolled with that, and then we had the front cover was that the front cover and the front the headline was something about like simmering tempers, or Alta chooses a different route, but it was a picture then of and Lane wins. I think Tom Lane. I don't know if it was his first name, but Lane wins. I think.
But it was a great party, and it was really like being in the heartland. Like, what was it? Iowan lunch meat? What was that?
Yeah, there was some crazy Iowa lunch meat.
Lunch meat, and then they had this great
plywood, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, in the Midwest, it's like Chex Mix, but it's like dipped in chocolate. And anyway, so it was very local. It felt like we were really in Iowa, and an Iowa buffet. It was really cool.
Yeah, but no, it was that night. It was exciting as well because like there wasn't it like there's like a running tally on the Chiron below I mean, the local time, I don't know if it was the one of the local television stations. So they were just running through all the local elections, and they were, running like this city council, this county supervisor, this and that. And all of a sudden you'd see like, Alta, Stormlake and Alta, which was the town that they were covering, which is right next door, one of the bedroom communities for Stormlake. So like those would be running at the bottom of the frame, and everybody was watching the numbers come in and trying to like hope that they won.
Mm. And is the Stormlake Times now focusing more on the internet subscriptions versus the paper?
I don't know if it's more, but they're definitely pivoting that way. Art, I think he is responsible for putting out, I think, the daily digital. So they do have a daily digital feed. But he laughs that when we were on tour, he met many newspaper people that came out for the Q&As afterwards. And one person, they were talking about how we're going to, move into the next digital world and into that digital platform. He said, like, well, we have as good as a platform as $100 a month can afford. So, if you're still going to be working on low budgets, but you have to figure out how to get that out and, into the next community. Really, it's, I think what Beth was saying in terms of our impact, it's about building media literacy as well. Like, I have a 24-year-old daughter, and she doesn't read the newspaper. She reads the newspaper when I sit down with her and read it. But if she's on her own, she'll never pick up a newspaper and read it. And she does anything, it's digital.
I think Art also knows that the future is digital. It's not like he's a diehard for paper right now, because so much of their readership wants the paper, and they have an older readership as well that really relies on that. But I think he knows that the future is digital. And he has said, like, if we had made this film 5 years ago, he would have said digital, no way. But now he's saying yes to digital. And for all you viewers out there, he is now considering a podcast.
I was going to ask. That was the next question. And so the next obvious question too is, and one of the viewers wanted to know this too, what about the next generation? I mean, is Tom going to take over the paper eventually?
Yeah, I think that's still a question. I mean, yes, he wants to now because of all of, I mean, they won a Pulitzer, there's a lot of attention given to them. And yes, I think he really does. But he's a writer, as Art is a great writer, his brother is a great manager. And so how do you, they're going to have to staff up, I think, more, and they might have the staff right now. They have a new guy in, I think, that came up from the Des Moines Register, that might be able to help manage, the finances and, how to figure the best way forward for them. But I think
he's also said, like, his real hope actually is that the next editor of the paper is a Latina woman. He'd really like to see that. And, kind of, if the first generation of young people are graduating now from high school in Stormlake and from Buena Vista University, who are fully like bilingual, and so he's really hoping that locals continue to work for the paper, because he really believes in, not transplanting, whether it's correct or incorrect. He really believes in not transplanting talent and bringing them to Stormlake, but cultivating, talent from the ground up.
Interesting. Here is a viewer who says, I was born in Nebraska and I have family from Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri. I was always curious if my family had a greater awareness of the whole world besides their local concerns. Did the Stormlake Times cover the world's news?
Yeah, I mean, Art totally writes about local politics. I mean, to a degree. I mean, when he says, it's more in the editorial section that, he reports on larger issues, but, his mission really is more like, if it didn't happen in Buena Vista County, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So that's really the commitment. But in the editorial page, they tend to go more into local or national politics.
Mhm.
And he's doing a little bit more now than he used to. Would you kind of agree, Jerry?
I would, yeah. But I do believe, that's what is very unique about his voice, is that he really does still bring the Iowa-ness or that connection to what issues are locally onto a national platform. I think, he'll talk about, he'll talk about, climate change, but he'll, relate it to something that's happening, there.
Mhm.
So I think he has and that's a talent, where you're able to, in a couple of lines, be able to make that connection so quickly.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at the time and it's 9:45. So I just wanted to thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Beth, for taking the time to talk with us and to present this terrific film. And I want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving. And I want to thank everybody for participating this evening. And I want to also turn this over to Jeremy Lentz, who has a final yes.
Can I just add a couple of things?
Sure.
So if you love the film, or if you want to keep abreast of what we're up to, you can follow us on all social channels at Stormlake Movie. And we even have a website at stormlakemovie.com, and you can sign up for our newsletter. And the film, I will just say, the film that you just saw is streaming for free on the national PBS right now.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
if you have family in Kansas or Missouri or in Iowa and you want them to see the film, they can through December 15th for free. It's on other platforms as well, like Amazon and iTunes, but it's free through December 15th on PBS.
Terrific. Thank you. So I do want to give the last word to Jeremy, our executive director. And here he is.
Hi, Ellen. Thank you for the introduction. Beth and Jerry, thank you for the wonderful talkback and for bringing Stormlake to our Teaneck International Film Festival and to our community. As we saw tonight, there's so many themes about community, which is what we're about, that speak to us right here in Teaneck with what we see going on with our media. So we want to thank you. This has been the closing of what has become a wonderful, wonderful festival. I want to take a minute to also acknowledge all of our volunteers, our army of volunteers that come together each year to put this on. Without community, we would not be here. And without the staff and everybody that works to put this up year after year after year, it is a testament to what makes Teaneck so great. With that being said, I want to encourage all our viewers out there, if you like what you saw in the last 2 weeks, either in person or virtually, to please support us, because we do rely on your donations. There's a donate button right on top of my head on the screen. So if you click the donate button, you can make a tax-deductible donation to TIFF. And also really exciting news. So one of the reasons that we closed with Stormlake and that we gifted this to our patrons as a free screening was that this is a PBS Independent Lens film. And we will be back starting in January of 2022 with our third Independent Lens pop-up doc series. And that'll run starting in January until the spring months with a film each month. So definitely make sure to sign up for those and sign up for our newsletter, which you can do at teaneckfilmfestival.org, so that you get all the updated news. And we'll be back in January with Missing in Brooks County. So we'll see you all then. And thank you, everyone. Blessings for a wonderful Thanksgiving and a wonderful holiday season. And we look forward to seeing you in 2022. Thank you all. Good evening. Good night. Best wishes.
Night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.